I'd like to thank the Brown Hill Creek Rotary Club for our delicious lunch, the chops and the marvellous sausages. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Allan Campbell. Allan is a man of many parts, teacher, primary, landscape designer and nurseryman, writer and curator. He established the Nora Heysen Foundation with the artist's support in 2003, which holds in trust a large volume of her works, particularly her drawings. In actual fact, it now holds the largest collection of her work in Australia. He's been the manager and curator for the Heysen family for over 20 years, and Allan is one of those very special people. Allan is a true believer who had the good fortune to find the right instrument for his passion. So join me in thanking Allan for his talk you're going to hear in a moment.
An hour. Thank you, William. Welcome to you all. I'll start off with just one correction. The actual person who initiated the Nora Heysen Foundation was not myself, it was Peter Heysen. So before I overlook that, I just thought I'd start off with that. Thank you, and welcome to you all. I'm just going to give you a profile of the actual estate, the Heysen estate. Hans Heysen bought this property in 1912 as a result of a very successful Melbourne exhibition in which he realised £1,500, which in those days was a lot of money. This was the second of two very successful Melbourne exhibitions, and enabled him to buy this property, the house which was already here, and the accompanying 30 acres. His first mission was then to build his studio, which he did within a 6-month period. So he actually moved in to take possession of the studio in early 1913. It's just gained recognition as the oldest purpose-built surviving artist studio in Australia, which we're quite chuffed about. We thought Norman Lindsay's studio was his etching studio in the Blue Mountains at Falconbridge, but it's 1916, I'm told, and we're 1912. It's a beautiful studio. Again, it was his extravagance, his investment. It cost him just on £400 to have built, which in 1912 was a major investment of money. The glass was brought in from Europe, the French tile roof from Marseille in France. He had it architecturally designed for him, but he had big input into what he wanted. And as I say, being completed in early 1913, for the next 55 years, that was his working studio. So make sure you do have a look. It's up on the hill with 8 children. A very wise man, he built it right away from the house. It's up on the hill. If you go through the gate, turn left, you'll see it sitting up there on the hill. The house, as I say, was already here. The house was built in the 1870s, and Heysen converted it completely from a typical Victorian villa, as it was, into a more spacious 20-room bungalow. It's a beautiful house. I think it's one of the most intact and best preserved historic homes in Australia. And I'm glad to say at last it's receiving that status. This place is a national treasure and a national secret, and that's what we're trying to change. And I won't get on that soapbox for too long. But the house itself, it houses the private collection of the Heysen family. So there's over 100 originals of his work here. It's a bit of a re-education program for people. They don't realise the amazing versatility of Heysen. You say Heysen to people, I'll say, oh, you're gum trees and cattle. Mind you, no one painted gum trees like Heysen, and that image he actually projected onto the national consciousness in a way that no one else has done. But he was probably one of the most versatile of the Australian artists. He worked in 12 mediums, primarily oil, charcoal, pastel, French chalk, pen and ink. His favourite was actually charcoal. But 12 mediums and a great diversity of subjects. Landscapes, of course, beautiful still life, seascapes, portraiture. It's a great shame that a better rotation of his work isn't done by our state galleries. But that's another soapbox I won't get onto either. The house has remained intact largely since the 1920s. As you view it now is as it would have been set up by the 1920s. And it's got a grace and a charm that speaks of a bygone era, and that's what people love about it. Its uniqueness is its wonderful intactness, and the fact that it's still in use as a family home. This is the third generation of the Heysen family to own it, and even though they don't actually live in it, this is the beauty of Adelaide. You're up the freeway in 15 minutes. All their entertainment, their weddings, birthdays, Christmases are held here, and that's part of its great charm. And that's what people really love about it, is the family presence. And under the, as Peter will detail, under the prospective foundation conditions, one of the conditions is that the family still have access to it as their family home, because that's what people really respond to. It houses, Heysen was an unusual artist in that he was a very successful young artist. When he bought this property, he was in his early 30s. And he could name his own price, really, from that time on. He could put 400 guineas on a major painting, which he could live on for a year. With 8 children, that was very important. So the house speaks of their wonderful partnership, of he and his wife, of Sally Heysen, and the aesthetic eye for lovely pieces. The house has got great style, but it's not pretentious. It's very much a spirit about it that people respond to. And that's our biggest challenge, as Richard has often said to us, is to protect and preserve this wonderful spirit of this place, particularly in that house. And I think that's a challenge that we've really got to put on paramount status. The property, it's 150 acres. When he bought this property, it was 30 acres. And then neighbour by neighbour, he bought out neighbouring properties purely to protect the gum trees. Heysen was an early conservationist. And by the late 1940s, he'd expanded it from the original 30 acres, 34 acres, to 150, but purely for reasons of protecting the gum. So some of the oldest gums in the district are on this property. Some are reputedly 600 years old. So we encourage people to walk it, to artists to use it. This has the potential to be South Australia's Bundanon. What the Boyd property is to New South Wales, this could be to South Australia. Artisan residents, summer schools, eventually perhaps, you know, appropriate accommodation on the property itself. We get an ever-increasing patronage from overseas people because it's such an iconic Australian property. Yeah. The garden Heysen laid out. As you know, artists are often very connected to their gardens. It was never a manicured grand garden. It was a rambling rural garden. The garden has enormous potential. I remember, Ian, how many years ago was that conference in Manning Clark House at Canberra?
10 years.
10 years, oh my God, was it? 10 years ago. On the theme that patronage, same theme, patronage of historic homes across Australia is falling off. And we all agreed you look at your next best asset, and we all agreed our next best asset was our gardens. And figures show that more people will pay to patronise a garden than they will an historic home or art gallery. So our aim, one of our aims, is to put a lot of work into this garden. It could be eventually, you know, an Antipodean Giverny. And the fact that Heysen laid out the garden, loved his garden, and a lot of the roses, for example, are nearing their 90th year that he actually planted and nurtured. Very much a European garden. You realise in autumn the European nature of this garden. So that's one of our aims, is to really promote and extend and restore the garden. It had huge picking gardens and vegetable gardens, etc. Naturally, with a family of 8 children, it was extended. Peter will talk about the future of this property. As I said, it's still totally privately owned by the Heysen family, which is part of its great charm, but also, unfortunately, one of its big handicaps, because it effectively negates any hope of funding. And we've tried all avenues of funding with no success because of its total private ownership. We're getting just on 10,000 through a year, which isn't bad. Harndorf, little old Harndorf next door, love it or loathe it, gets 1 million. I don't want 1 million. As it is, it's a conservation nightmare. But if we could double that to patronage, to say 20,000, we'd probably be far more economically buoyant. We all, when we opened in '94, we all, the family and myself, optimistically thought we might be able to make this place financially buoyant. But in fact, we realised that you can't. And I've been told so many times, no historic home makes any sort of a profit. The other handicap is probably what I call the Heysen factor. Where you say Heysen, it's what I call the ho-hum factor, to be honest, where people say, oh yeah, the guy who painted the gum trees, full stop. And it's a bit of a re-education program, because once people come here, as I said earlier, they realise this artist's amazing versatility in both subject and medium, and what's here in the incredible collection that is still here. So that's a matter to slowly but surely overcome. When I went through art school in the 70s, you didn't mention Heysen. Heysen was kind of effectively shelved when he died in the late 60s. And unfortunately, the schools of gum tree painters did him more harm than good. I know it's the highest form of flattery to copy one, but to this day you still see the gum tree painters that actually serve to mask Heysen's own genius. So that's something we're working on. A lot of the fault lies with the state galleries. They don't do a rotation of Heysen's work. The very successful exhibition that toured Australia over the last 2.5 years really opened people's eyes up to Heysen's work. The art world, as we all know, is a very strange and unique world. I could use a lot more adjectives there, but and in time he'll make a comeback. He's in the process actually of making a comeback, which is good to see. It's also the artistic home of his daughter, Nora. Do make sure when you we're doing open house, by the way. We're opening both studios and the residence. It's much better to do it that way than trying to do a guided tour. But do make sure you go through the shop into his daughter Nora's studio. It is the artistic home of father and daughter. And Nora died in 2003 at the age of 93. And unlike her father, and she's always lived somewhat under the shadow of the famous Heysen father, but now she's died, she's starting to receive her full accreditation, which is great to see. She was a trailblazer for women. First woman to win the prestigious Archibald Prize in Portraiture in 1938. First woman war artist appointed in the Second World War and sent to New Guinea. Now that she's died, as I say, she's starting to receive her full recognition. She's always revered her father, don't get me wrong, but she's always lived a bit under his shadow. We have an exhibition in here that we keep extending called 8 Decades. Last year would have been her centenary because she was born in Harndorf in 1911. Last year, 2011, was her centenary. And we've got eight decades of her work from when she was 14 years of age to when she was still working at the age of 92 with Judy Kassab and Margaret Woodward and Charles Blackman in Sydney. She moved to Sydney in the late 1930s to claim her own artistic territory away from her famous father, but she frequently returned here and always painted in her studio. So as I say, it's the artistic home of father and daughter. And I've spoken long enough. I recognise that from yesterday. There's no bell. It should be ringing a bell. So what we'll do, folks, because I'm going to hand over to Peter, is to, as I say, open house. Now, unfortunately, I just opened the front door and this blaze of flies and heat came through, so I shut it promptly. We'll open the back door. This is actually the back of the house. It's quite deceptive, this house, and it's a lot larger than you think. As I say, it was 1878, but 1912, a lot of work done to it, in 1924, the double-storied extension on the back. But if you go through the back door, or if you go around the other side, it's a lovely entrance through the little conservatory, but certainly not the front door. The studio will be open. Nora's studio is open, and I think you have till 3 o'clock, so if you want to have a wander through the garden or on the property, you're most welcome. But thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Allan.